Have any of you found it interesting that George Orwell, and in particular his novel 1984, remains so popular? The world is so completely different than the one that George Orwell was living in. It would seem that that novel would have gone by the wayside, but instead, it's getting kind of a resurgence. It's not uncommon now for people in casual conversation or in public discourse, political leaders, or just friends posting on social media to talk about or 1984, Big Brother, or to use the adjective Orwellian. But why? I have some ideas, and I'm going to be writing about them here in a couple of days or posting it in a couple of days. But before I do that, I would really like to know what you think. Why do you think George Orwell remains such an urgent part of American consciousness? I'm thinking you would think George Orwell, he kind of won. His image of Big Brother, the physical image of Big Brother, was Joseph Stalin. And the Stalinist Communist Party that Joseph Stalin created, the dystopia of what it was to be a party member in Stalin's Russia or Stalin's Soviet Union, or what it must have been to be just a proletariat who was seen as something to be killed, to be murdered if there were simply too many of you. George Orwell knew about that, and he wrote about it compellingly. In fact, one of the things about 1984 that makes it so much fun to read is it pushes you along. Some writers, you kind of wade through their novels. Other novels, maybe a thriller, they pull you along. But George Orwell, he pushes you along. It's almost as if there is a drumbeat and a rhythm that makes your heart pound a little bit, and you find yourself pushing yourself to read more. And 1984 being such a short work, usually most of us, when we read it, will immediately go back and reread it. And given that, I really do have to wonder, why is it so many of us find it relevant? Because, as I said, Joseph Stalin died. He died 3 years after George Orwell. Orwell did not know that the Soviet Union was going to fall. And it wasn't just the Soviet Union either that I imagine was worrying George Orwell, because in 1984, he wrote about a post-nuclear war society in which 3 superstates emerged. And George Orwell had watched Soviet Russia dominate Northern and Eastern Europe and desperately clamor for South America and other parts of Asia. It watched the United States unify Western Europe and parts of Africa, Asia, and South America under what was euphemistically called the free world, with the United States as its head. George Orwell knew which one he preferred, to be sure, but he must have been nervous. There must have been a lot of anxiety in him as to what these superstates were going to do. Now, today we know the Soviet Union collapsed. We know the Communist Party fell. And we know that even the United States does not dominate Europe. In fact, we have less influence over the world now than we did just 15 years ago. It's not necessarily bad. A lot of Americans don't want the United States involved in everything. We see little bitty old Scotland about to float a plebiscite and no longer be a part of the United Kingdom. We see Eastern Europe going through all of its struggles to become a series of independent, often ethnically independent, which is dangerous, states, but something completely different than George Orwell's 1984. And yet 1984 is everywhere. So I'm going to ask you, why is that the case? Why do we fear Big Brother? Why do we consider Big Brother, fear or not? Why is Orwell something that we cannot get away from? We all read Animal Farm, enjoyed it. Nobody remembers George Orwell because of Animal Farm. If that was his most important work, nobody reading this or listening to this right now would know who George Orwell was. He had brilliant essays. I just finished reading a great essay in which he blistered the publishing house of the United Kingdom for the way they treated the publication of Mein Kampf before and after World War II. Brilliant stuff. Nobody, myself included, would have ever read that essay had it not been for 1984. At least not in this decade, not in this century. So why is he so compelling, and why does he feel so urgent? If you will, down below, write down a few ideas you have about Orwell. Why do you like him? Why do you dislike him? Why do you admire him? Why do you have no thoughts about him, maybe? Or if you do have thoughts, why do they feel to you urgent if they are? Let me know. Thank you.